Joan Ferris was 41 years old when she signed 3 strangers into the guest book at Pinecrest Lodge. It was a Tuesday. The lobby smelled like wood smoke and burnt coffee. She remembers the man's jacket. A green canvas coat, sleeve torn at the elbow, the kind of tear that comes from catching on a branch, not from wear. She remembers thinking it looked fresh. She didn't think much else. She handed over 2 keys, said the ice machine was broken, and went back to her crossword. 3 weeks later, she mentioned the torn sleeve to a deputy standing in her lobby. He nodded. He wrote something down. Nothing came of it. The mention never made it into any file the department can produce today. This is Marrow Creek, Oregon. October the 14th. The guestbook page from that week is missing. No one has ever explained why. Mara Voss was 29. She kept a paperback in every coat pocket she owned, finished or not, and could recite the first line of more novels than anyone in her family thought was healthy. Her brother Daniel was 31, an electrician, the kind of person who fixed things before you asked. He'd driven the whole way without letting anyone else touch the radio. Their friend Tessa Ryland was 28. She'd organized the trip. She always organized the trip. The 3 of them had been hiking together since college. This one was supposed to be easy: 2 nights, a loop trail, a lodge with a working fireplace. Mara had stayed at Pinecrest once before, as a child, with her father. She hadn't mentioned that to anyone in the car. No one connects that yet. They will. The morning of the 14th started the way mornings start when nothing has gone wrong. Daniel made coffee on a camp stove outside their rental car. Tessa checked the trail map twice, the way she always did, folding and refolding it until the creases went soft. Mara sat on the hood and read 3 pages of a paperback she'd already finished once. They left the main road at 11:40, taking what they thought was a shortcut onto a service road that wound behind the ridge. It added 40 minutes. None of them minded. The day was warm. The light was good. At the same hour, Joan Ferris was folding towels in the lodge's back room, half listening to a radio that only got 2 stations. Her shift had started slow. A delivery truck had come and gone. She'd argued gently with the maintenance man about the ice machine. By early afternoon, she was back at the front desk, where she stayed. At 9:47 that evening, 3 travelers walked through the lodge doors, cold from the drive, asking if the kitchen was still open. Joan told them it wasn't. She handed them keys. One of them, the man in the green jacket, stayed near the door a moment longer than the other 2. Then they went up to their rooms. And the ordinary day for all 4 of them ended there. By the second morning, no one had seen Mara, Daniel, or Tessa leave their rooms. Housekeeping found both beds unmade and untouched. Their car was still in the lot. Their phones were inside the rooms, both dead. A trail log at the ranger station showed they'd never checked in for the loop hike they'd planned. Families started calling by that evening. The lodge called the sheriff's office the next morning. A search began 2 days after that. Not because anyone moved slowly on purpose, but because each step waited on the one before it, and each step took longer than it should have. Searchers found the rental car 11 miles from the lodge, parked at a turnout that didn't appear on any official trail map. No occupants. No signs of struggle. A water bottle, half full, sitting on the passenger seat like someone meant to come back for it. That same week, Joan Ferris called the sheriff's office for the first time. The call was logged at 2:14 p.m. on October the 18th. The transcript, recovered years later from an archive tape, records Joan saying, "There was a man with them, green jacket, torn sleeve. He waited by the door after they checked in, like he was watching which room they went to." The deputy who took the call wrote 4 words in the case log. Witness. Guest description noted. No torn sleeve. No green jacket. No mention of a man waiting by the door. Between what Joan said and what was written down sits a gap nobody has ever closed. The search expanded outward from the rental car in a grid pattern, the way these searches do: concentric rings, volunteers in orange vests, dogs working the brush line. Investigators believed the group had set out on foot from the turnout, heading toward the loop trail roughly 2 miles east. The grid was built around that assumption. It was a reasonable assumption. It was also wrong. On October the 22nd, Joan called again. This time she described a vehicle, dark, boxy, an older model SUV, idling at the edge of the lodge's parking lot for nearly 20 minutes on the night the group checked in. She'd noticed it because the headlights stayed on the whole time, pointed at nothing. The deputy thanked her. The call lasted under 2 minutes. The vehicle was never added to any bulletin. The search grid, which by then had already burned 4 days covering the wrong terrain, was never redrawn to include the tree line behind the lodge, the tree line Joan had been describing both times she called. Somewhere behind that tree line, the actual answer was waiting. The search teams walked past it twice. It would be 11 years before anyone sat down with Joan Ferris and treated what she saw as evidence rather than a footnote. She remembered the time precisely, 9:47 p.m., because she'd looked at the lobby clock when the door opened. She remembered the order they walked in, Tessa first, then Daniel, then Mara, then the man in the green jacket for seconds behind, close enough that Joan had assumed at first he was part of their group. She remembered the sound through the lodge wall later that night, just after 11. A door opening on the second floor, footsteps in the gravel lot below her window, and then nothing. She hadn't thought it was unusual. Guests came and went at odd hours. She remembered the boots. Heavy tread, mud-caked, a distinctive notch worn into the left heel. She'd noticed it because the man had stood close to the desk, and she'd looked down out of habit while he waited. The lodge had a security camera over the front door. It recorded that night. No one reviewed the footage for 11 years. When investigators finally pulled it, the timestamp showed 9:47 p.m., exactly when Joan said. And in the gravel lot, in a patch of mud near the tree line, a single boot print had been cast and logged into evidence the week of the disappearance, filed under unidentified possible hiker. The notch in the heel matched what Joan described, detail for detail. No one had ever compared the two. Now someone had. The cold case review began in the spring, 11 years after the disappearance, when a new detective working through a backlog of unresolved files found a storage box marked with the case number and Joan's name on a sticky note that had long since lost its adhesive. Inside was the original transcript of her second call, the one about the idling SUV, the one that never made it into a bulletin. The detective cross-referenced it against the boot print, the camera timestamp, and a vehicle registration that had surfaced 2 years earlier in an unrelated traffic stop. Every piece lined up. Joan's account, recorded and ignored more than a decade earlier, matched the forensic timeline down to the minute. That was the moment of confirmation. Quiet. No press conference. Just a detective, alone in a records room, realizing a woman had told them everything they needed in October, and the file had simply moved on without her. What the department did instead in those 11 years was reassign the case twice, once to a detective who retired 6 months later, and once to a unit that closed it as inactive due to insufficient leads. Somewhere in that second reassignment, the original security footage was logged as transferred and never located again. The boot print sat in an evidence locker the entire time, 3 rooms away from Joan's transcript. When the new detective finally called Joan to tell her she'd been right, she didn't ask what happened to the case in between. She said only, "I wondered sometimes if I'd made it up." Mara, Daniel, and Tessa were found in a ravine off the service road, less than half a mile from where the rental car had been parked. The man in the green jacket, identified through the boot print, the vehicle registration, and eventually a partial confession, had followed them from the lodge that night and confronted them near the tree line. What happened next took minutes. The ravine had hidden it for 11 years. If Joan's second call had been logged as a lead on October the 22nd, search teams would have reached that ravine 5 days earlier than they did. That is stated once. It will not be repeated. The man in the green jacket was convicted 8 years after the cold case review reopened the file, 19 years after the disappearance. He received 3 consecutive life sentences. The Voss and Ryland families attended every day of the trial. Afterward, they said the word closure carefully, the way people do when they're not sure it applies to them. Joan Ferris is 68 now. She lives 2 towns over from Marrow Creek, in a small house with a garden she keeps mostly out of habit. No one from the department ever called to thank her. No one asked her to testify, though her original statements were read into the record by someone else. She still has a handwritten copy of the guestbook page from that week. The original went missing within a month of the disappearance, and Joan, for reasons she's never fully explained, had copied it out by hand the day before it vanished. She has never shown it to anyone official. In a short interview years later, Joan said only, "I told them what I saw. I told them twice. After that, it wasn't mine anymore." The official case file, closed and archived, lists the investigation's turning point as new evidence developed during cold case review. It does not mention October the 18th. It does not mention October the 22nd. It does not mention Joan Ferris by name. Between what she said and what the record keeps is the same gap it always was. If you stayed until the end, you've heard something that took 11 years to surface from a storage box no one was supposed to open again. What moment in the story stayed with you? Leave it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're the kind of person who notices the small detail, the torn sleeve, the idling car, the boot print no one compared, subscribe. Because somewhere right now there's a file with your name in it waiting for someone to read it twice.